So today we're diving into a really powerful and, well, a pretty unique account of 4,000 years of history. We're going to break down a single, sweeping narrative that tries to explain the past, the present, and the future of an entire people, all through a very specific divine lens, one that frames their very existence as a miracle.
You know, the source material for this kicks off with this incredibly striking story. Apparently, Frederick the Great of Prussia asked his court preacher for a single, unanswerable proof that the Bible was inspired. And the preacher's reply? It was just 4 words. The Jew, Your Majesty. And that really sets the tone for the entire argument we're about to explore. The idea that the sheer survival and endurance of the Jewish people is presented as the central miracle of history.
And this whole idea gets wrapped up in one central image: the burning bush. You know the one, a fire that burns and burns and burns, but the bush itself is never actually consumed. This becomes a powerful symbol for a people who have gone through millennia of just unimaginable trials, persecutions, dispersions, yet have never been destroyed. The author literally calls their survival the miracle of history.
All right, so that brings us to our first section, a miraculous preservation. The entire narrative we're looking at is built on this one foundational idea: that the survival of the Jewish people is so unique, it actually requires a divine explanation. So you might be asking, how does the source actually make this case for uniqueness? Well, it lays out a few key arguments. First, their incredible antiquity, arguing that no other nation can trace its lineage so far back. It points to events in their history as clear signs of a divine presence. Think the parting of the Red Sea, the pillar of cloud and fire. It also highlights the sheer number of history-shaping figures they've produced, and, maybe most amazingly, the fact that they've outlived all their ancient conquerors: Assyria, Babylon, Rome, you name it. But the real kicker, the central point, is their ability to hold on to a distinct identity, even after being scattered across the globe without a homeland for nearly 2,000 years.
Okay, so let's move into Section 2, the past. Now, in this telling, history isn't just a series of random events. No, it's framed as the deliberate unfolding of a divine plan. The argument is that this people was chosen for a very specific purpose in the world.
And this timeline here gives us the highlight reel from that perspective. It all starts with the call of Abraham, moves through the epic exodus from Egypt, and hits a peak during the golden age under Kings David and Solomon. But then, the story takes a turn. The kingdom splits in 2, which leads to centuries of decline, captivity, and it all culminates in that catastrophic destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in AD 70. This event is what kicks off the Great Scattering. So why? What was the whole point of this journey, according to this viewpoint? Well, it was all in service of 4 divine purposes. First, to teach the world about one God in an age of countless deities. Second, to be the scribes and guardians of the Holy Scriptures. Third, to be the human family tree that would eventually produce the Savior, Jesus. And finally, to act as the salt of the earth, a kind of preservative force preventing the total moral collapse of humanity.
And that leads us right into the next phase of the story, which the narrative defines as the present era. This is that long period of being scattered and suffering that followed AD 70. This is the unconsumed part of that burning bush metaphor we talked about.
Now, to understand this period, we have to get our heads around this key phrase, the times of the Gentiles. The source defines this as a specific chunk of history, starting way back with the Babylonian captivity, where control of Jerusalem gets handed off from one non-Jewish world power to the next. And here's the crucial part. The narrative argues that this is the era we are still living in today.
And during these times of the Gentiles, the source chronicles this just relentless, heartbreaking history of persecution. It starts with Rome's destruction of Jerusalem, then it moves through medieval Europe, showing banishment from England and France, and these horrific massacres in Germany where Jews were scapegoated for the Black Death. And of course, the list includes the Spanish Inquisition, which ended with their total expulsion in 1492. So this all raises a huge question, right? In this theological framework, did God just abandon this people? The narrative answers that with a firm no, and it uses this metaphor of 2 olive trees to explain. The good olive tree, that's Israel. Some of its natural branches were broken off because of unbelief. Then, branches from a wild olive tree, which represents the Gentiles, were grafted in. But, and this is so important, the wild branches don't replace the tree, they get their life from the original root. And the text argues that those original broken-off branches can, and one day will, be grafted back in.
And that very idea of being grafted back in, well, that leads us directly into the final act of this grand narrative, a prophesied future where everything is ultimately restored.
The core prophecy here is what the text calls a second-time restoration. It's very clear to distinguish this from the return from Babylon ages ago. This future gathering, it says, will be final, it will be permanent, and it will be from all the nations where they've been scattered. And get this, the key promise is that this time they will no more be pulled up out of their land. But here's the thing, this restoration isn't portrayed as being easy. The source says a terrifying period of trial has to come first, and it calls it the time of Jacob's trouble or the Great Tribulation. It's pictured as this final, incredibly intense period of suffering and judgment for the nation, like a melting pot or a refiner's fire that's meant to burn away all the impurities before the final redemption.
So the prophesied sequence of events is laid out in 4 very clear stages. First, the Jewish people are gathered back to their homeland, but they're still in a state of spiritual unbelief. Second, they go through that intense judgment, the time of Jacob's trouble. Third, at the absolute climax of all this turmoil, Christ physically returns to the Mount of Olives. And finally, in one single dramatic moment, upon seeing him, the entire nation is converted, born in one day, as the source puts it.
In this climactic event, it's framed as nothing less than a national resurrection. The text connects it directly to that famous biblical vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, where an entire army of skeletons clicks back together and comes to life. The interpretation here is that this isn't just about individual people, but about a nation that was politically and spiritually dead being miraculously brought back to life on the world stage.
So, wow, we've just walked through an immense story. 4,000 years of history framed as one single cohesive divine narrative. It's a powerful and it's a complex vision, and it really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. What does this kind of theological lens reveal about the power of stories themselves? About their ability to shape a people's identity, to make sense of incredible suffering, and to provide a profound hope for the future?